Alright, so today I want to give you guys a bit of a 5-month review of this little guy right here. My completely overkill water-cooled ITX gaming PC that I also use for streaming and video editing as well. It's about the 5-month mark now, and I think it's about time that we kind of recap things, what I've been using it for, what it's good for, some of the problems I've encountered, and we'll also be doing a full clean and coolant swap as well. So firstly, let me just recap the build for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's an ITX build inside of the N-Case M1 V6, one of my favorite PC cases of all time, as most of you know, and inside there we have a liquid-cooled RTX 3090 and a 12-core Ryzen 5900X. Those are cooled by two 240mm radiators, a thick rad from EK mounted on the side, which does most of the cooling, and a slim rad on the bottom from XSPC for a little bit of extra help. The pump and reservoir are actually external, mounted at the back of the case. This is the Iceman reservoir with the Swiftech MCP35X pump, and this has performed absolutely amazing over the last 5 months. Now, I definitely had concerns that running a pump externally like this would be very loud and annoying, but it's actually very quiet, and believe it or not, it's actually gotten quieter over time due to all of those little air bubbles in the loop finding their way out. So all in all, this build has performed phenomenally. I mean, it handles everything that I can possibly throw at it, as you would expect with that kind of hardware. I mean, the 3090 is incredible when it comes to 4K gaming, and paired with this monitor, the 27GN950, I'm able to make use of that high refresh rate. But more importantly, when it comes to video editing in DaVinci Resolve Studio, I work with 6K Blackmagic RAW footage, and with my previous 2080 Ti, I would run into a VRAM limitation. But here that is just not a problem since we have 24GB of VRAM available. I haven't been close to even maxing that out, but it definitely is nice to have that kind of VRAM ceiling to work with. And some of you guys might have noticed the new dark theme intro for Optimum Tech in the last few videos. I was actually able to build and render that out in less than a day in Blender, thanks to the Optics render engine paired with the 3090, which is so powerful and efficient. I've also been streaming over on Twitch about twice a week for the last couple of months. I've been using the NVENC encoder on the RTX 3090 to handle all of the video encoding, and honestly, it has never skipped a beat. The video quality is also pretty good. It's good enough to download the streams afterward and then upload the highlights to the second channel. So overall, despite the small form factor, this PC build has allowed me to do the things that I want with the channel and still be creative with the least amount of friction possible. But there have been some problems and hiccups along the way, starting with when I upgraded my hybrid camera, which is what I'm filming with now, to the Sony a7S III. When I first imported the footage onto my timeline and started editing with it, I began experiencing some serious crashes and system instability. In fact, my system would completely restart just scrubbing on the timeline, not just at will, but maybe 2 to 3 times per edit, but the system would completely restart and I'd get a CPU temperature error upon boot. This actually went on for a couple of months, at least 2 to 3 times per edit, and at worst I would actually lose some editing progress. I managed to fix this by switching to the less compressed video codec, XAVC-I, as opposed to XAVC-S, which seems to be what was causing the crashes and those CPU temperature spikes. So absolutely no crashes now, and timeline performance is so much better, but I definitely need to upgrade to larger SD cards to accommodate that less compressed footage. Now, there are actually a couple of other problems that I'll mention and hopefully solve before the end of this video, but right now I really just need to give this thing a solid clean, because I have not cleaned this thing once since I first built it about 5 months ago, and as you can probably see from this angle, it is incredibly dusty, and I'm okay with that. I personally would rather just run the build with no dust filters for maximum performance and airflow, and just give it a really solid clean every few months. And I'll be cleaning it with this, the Metrovac ESD Safe Electric Duster. I have not tried this thing out yet, but looking at some of the reviews, it looks more than powerful enough, so let's give it a go. So that was a lot of dust, way more than I was expecting, but of course just taking the panels off you could see the amount of kind of dust caking on and filling the gaps in the radiators. It was not pleasant at all, and I think if I was going to leave it any longer it would probably start affecting the thermal and noise performance of the build as well. So that Metrovac thing did an incredibly good job, and surprisingly it wasn't that expensive either. I'll leave it linked down below for those interested. I was actually expecting to have to wipe down the build afterwards, wipe down the tubing and the radiators, but honestly it looks pretty much brand new. So the next order of maintenance is replacing the coolant, which is just a bit of a precaution, I guess. The coolant itself looks fine, it's not discolored or anything like that, but I really do like the idea of just putting something completely fresh in. So the coolant I'll be using, and the one that I have for pretty much every serious long-term liquid cooled build that I've done, is this right here, EK's Cryofuel in clear. Now this has, usual bio and corrosion inhibitors, so again it does feel nice to just kind of freshen that up, put a nice replacement in there. And if you're looking for something that's really reliable, just clear, straight to the point when it comes to cooling, this is something that I can definitely recommend. And next up, something that's always recommended to stay on top of with AMD Ryzen builds are BIOS and chipset driver updates. This can improve memory overclocking support, increase CPU boost frequencies, or just plainly improve system stability and correct any weird issues. In this case, there's an update that corrects pretty important USB connectivity issues, which is something that I have actually been having an issue with. I can't really pin it down to a single problem, but there are at least a couple of USB ports back there that I've noticed that have kind of just momentarily be disabled or be acting weird. So quick BIOS update and chipset driver installation, that's easy enough. And the last issue that I want to fix today is probably the weirdest of the bunch, and that's with Valorant. For some reason, after the 2.05 patch that went live a few weeks ago, I went from getting over 300 FPS consistently to barely managing 100 FPS. Sometimes it even drops below that in gunfights. I've tried reinstalling the game, reinstalling my graphics drivers, and still no improvement at all, which is extremely frustrating for a game that can pretty much run on integrated graphics, and apparently I'm far from the only one having this same issue after this patch. In fact, a quick scroll through the Valorant bug mega thread shows users experiencing the exact same thing. Alright, so we finally have this fixed. I'm back to normal performance now, which is great, but it wasn't very easy. So it turns out that ASUS Armory Crate or AI Suite 3, one of the two, were causing a clash with the Valorant patch 2.05, which actually went live a few weeks ago. And yes, I totally hear you, this stuff is usually bloatware, which I would not recommend installing in the first place, but I had Armory Crate installed for RGB lighting control, and I had AI Suite 3 in there for live fan control. Now I can live without both of these programs, but to completely get rid of them, if you're encountering a similar thing, simply uninstalling them was not enough. In fact, I had to completely nuke all of the third-party programs on my PC, then basically speedrun install everything except for those two ASUS programs, and only then was I able to get back to my previous performance in Valorant with over 300 FPS. So pretty overkill solution for sure, although it is pretty quick if you do it properly, and I'm not sure who to blame here, not really sure if it's Valorant or ASUS's fault, but just really happy to have this issue finally fixed. So after that full clean and all of those updates, my NKSM1 build is finally feeling brand new again, and definitely ready for another few months of use. I'm super happy with the performance that I'm getting here, not just the outright performance, but also the cooling and the really low noise levels. It's been really pleasant to have this thing beside me at all times. This build likely won't see an update until the next series of GPUs come out, which won't be for a while, so here's to enjoying many more months of editing, streaming, and gaming on this little PC. Now, if you are interested in the initial build video where I talk about how I put it together and kind of the things that you need to know, or the specific parts that I used, I will leave that linked down below in the description. As always, a huge thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you all in the next one.